The dust from the stagecoach settled around Beatrice Harper's worn boots as she stepped onto the hard, packed earth of Terlingua, Texas, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston with nothing but 2 carpetbags, a letter of introduction to the local schoolhouse that felt increasingly worthless in her trembling hands, and the echo of her aunt's parting words ringing in her ears. "You'll never fit in out there, Beatrice. You're too different, too educated, too outspoken for rough frontier men to tolerate." The September heat of 1883 hit her like a physical force, so different from the crisp New England autumn she had left behind. And as she surveyed the dusty street with its rough wooden buildings and the suspicious stares of the townspeople already gathering to examine the newcomer, she wondered if her aunt had been right after all. The town itself seemed to shimmer in the relentless sun, a collection of weathered structures clinging to existence in this harsh West Texas landscape. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks purple against the brilliant sky, and somewhere beyond them lay the Rio Grande and Mexico. Beatrice adjusted her spectacles, a nervous habit she had developed as a child, and smoothed down her dark green traveling dress that was far too heavy for this climate and far too fine for this place. "You the new schoolteacher?" A woman's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and assessing. Beatrice turned to find a stern-faced woman in her 50s, dressed practically in a simple brown dress and apron, her graying hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. "Yes, madam. Beatrice Harper. I have a letter from the County Education Board." Beatrice fumbled in her reticule for the document, her fingers clumsy with nerves. The woman barely glanced at it. "I'm Mrs. Thornton. My husband runs the general store. We're on the school board." She looked Beatrice up and down with obvious disapproval. "You're younger than we expected. And those spectacles, that fancy dress. Children out here need someone who understands hard work and discipline, not some city girl with book learning and delicate ways." The words stung because they echoed every doubt Beatrice had harbored during her long journey. "I assure you, Mrs. Thornton, I'm fully qualified. I graduated top of my class at the Boston Female Academy and have been tutoring students for 3 years. Tutoring rich children in parlors isn't the same as managing 30 wild frontier children in a one-room schoolhouse." Mrs. Thornton's expression remained cold. "But you're here now and we're desperate. The last teacher left after 2 months, couldn't handle it. Let's see if you last longer." She pointed toward a small building at the end of the street. "That's the schoolhouse. Living quarters are in the back, such as they are. School starts Monday. That gives you 4 days to prepare." Before Beatrice could respond, Mrs. Thornton had turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the street with her bags growing heavier by the moment. She felt the weight of multiple gazes on her back, heard the whispers starting. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she realized she was already perspiring in a most unladylike manner beneath her layers of proper Eastern clothing. "Need help with those bags, miss?" A younger voice, male this time, made her turn. A boy of perhaps 16 stood there, dusty and sunburned, with a friendly gap-toothed smile that was the first welcoming expression she had encountered. "I'm Tommy. Work at the livery stable. Happy to carry your things to the schoolhouse." "That's very kind, Tommy. Thank you." Beatrice felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders as the boy picked up both carpetbags as though they weighed nothing. As they walked down the rutted street, Tommy chattered amiably. "Don't mind Mrs. Thornton none. She's tough on everyone. Lost her only son to fever 5 years back, and she hasn't smiled since. Most folks here are good people, just wary of outsiders. We don't get many." He navigated around a water trough where several horses drank lazily. "The last teacher, Miss Preston, she was from St. Louis." cried every night so loud we could hear her from the boarding house. Then she up and left without even saying goodbye to the children. Beatrice's heart sank further. What frightened her so much? Tommy shrugged. Nothing frightened her exactly. She just couldn't adjust, I reckon. Hated the heat, hated the dust, hated the rough ways, kept saying everything was uncivilized and beneath her. He shot Beatrice a curious glance. You seem different, though. You got a kind face. They reached the schoolhouse, a simple wooden structure that had seen better days. The living quarters Tommy mentioned turned out to be a single small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, a battered dresser, and a small stove. A doorway connected it to the classroom, which was marginally larger, with rough benches arranged in rows, a teacher's desk at the front, and a blackboard that had seen much use and little cleaning. It's not much, Tommy admitted, setting down her bags. But Mr. Patterson, he owns the lumber mill. He says they'll make improvements once we have a teacher who stays. No point fixing things up if folks just keep leaving. Beatrice forced a smile. It will be fine, Tommy. Thank you for your help. After the boy left, she sank onto the bed, which creaked alarmingly under even her slight weight, and allowed herself a moment of doubt. The room was stifling, the walls thin enough that she could hear every sound from the street. Flies buzzed against the single window, and when she investigated the dresser, she found evidence that mice had made themselves at home. Her aunt's voice echoed again. You'll never fit in. Perhaps she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. Perhaps she should have stayed in Boston, endured the pitying looks and whispered gossip about being a spinster at 22, accepted that her life would be lived in the margins of other people's families. But no, she had not come all this way to fail before she even began. Beatrice stood, removed her too warm jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and began to unpack. She would prove them all wrong, starting with proving it to herself. The next 4 days passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice scrubbed the schoolhouse from top to bottom, chasing out the accumulated dust and debris. She organized the few books she found in a corner cupboard, discovered slates and chalk in various states of disrepair, and created lesson plans for students whose ages and abilities remained a mystery to her. She purchased supplies at Thornton's general store, where Mrs. Thornton remained cool and distant, counting out Beatrice's money as though expecting it to be counterfeit. She endured curious stares and whispered conversations that stopped whenever she came near. She tried to introduce herself to other townspeople and met with varying degrees of suspicion and indifference. By Sunday evening, Beatrice was exhausted, sunburned despite her bonnet, and fighting back waves of homesickness. She sat at her small table, eating a simple supper of bread and cheese, trying not to think about Sunday dinners in Boston with her sister's family, the comfortable conversation and laughter. Here, the silence pressed in on her, broken only by distant sounds from the saloon down the street. A knock at her door startled her so badly she dropped her bread. For a moment, she considered not answering, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, a woman alone in this rough place. But then a voice called out, "Miss Harper, it's Reverend Michaels. I wanted to welcome you to Terlingua." Relieved, Beatrice opened the door to find a kindly-looking man in his 60s, dressed in black despite the heat, with a round face and gentle eyes. "Reverend, please come in." "I won't intrude on your evening," he said, remaining on the threshold. "I just wanted to apologize for not calling sooner. I've been visiting families at the outlying ranches. I heard we had a new schoolteacher, and I wanted to extend a proper welcome." He handed her a basket covered with a cloth. "My wife sent this, some preserves and fresh bread." She would have come herself, but she's feeling poorly this evening. The simple kindness brought tears to Beatrice's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. That's very thoughtful. Thank you. Please thank Mrs. Michaels as well. The Reverend's expression grew sympathetic. I know it's not easy coming to a new place. Terlingua is a hard town in a hard land, Miss Harper. The people here have had to be tough to survive. But underneath that rough exterior there are good hearts. Give them time, Mrs. Thornton doesn't seem to think I'll last long enough for time to matter, Beatrice said, then immediately regretted her candor. But the Reverend simply nodded. Sarah Thornton has her reasons for her bitterness, though that doesn't excuse her unkindness. Don't let her discourage you. The children need a teacher, and from what I've seen of the schoolhouse, you've already done more than Miss Preston managed in 2 months. He tipped his hat. I'll see you at services tomorrow, I hope. Afterward, you'll join us for Sunday dinner. My wife would be delighted. After he left, Beatrice felt marginally better. At least there was one friendly face in town. She prepared for bed, trying not to think about the week ahead, about facing a classroom full of strange children, about whether she truly had the strength to build a life in this unforgiving place. Monday morning arrived with ruthless speed. Beatrice woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing and dressed with trembling hands in her most sensible dress, a gray cotton that was still too heavy, but at least less pretentious than her traveling clothes. She pinned her dark blonde hair into a severe bun, cleaned her spectacles twice, and tried to eat breakfast though her stomach churned with anxiety. The children began arriving just after 8. They came in small groups or alone, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 15, dressed in various states of cleanliness and repair. Some were clearly ranch children, tanned and lean with the wary eyes of young people who had seen hard things. Others were from town families, slightly softer but no less assessing. They filed into the classroom and sat on the benches, whispering and staring at Beatrice with frank curiosity. By 8:30, 32 children packed the small space. Beatrice stood before them, her heart pounding, and introduced herself. "Good morning. My name is Miss Harper. I've come from Boston to be your teacher." "Boston?" an older boy in the back snickered. "That's fancy. Bet you've never seen a real cow." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Beatrice felt her cheeks heat but kept her voice steady. "You're quite right. I haven't seen many cows. I'm sure there's a great deal you can all teach me about life here in Texas. Just as I hope to teach you reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography." "What's geography good for?" Another child called out. "It helps you understand the world beyond Terlingua. Don't you wonder what's out there? What other places are like?" Beatrice moved to the blackboard where she had drawn a rough map of the United States. "Right now, you're here," she pointed to Texas. "But the country is vast, and the world beyond even vaster." She saw a few faces show interest, though others remained skeptical. The morning proceeded in fits and starts. Beatrice quickly realized that the children's education levels varied wildly. Some could barely read, while others were quite advanced. Some had clearly attended school irregularly, when ranch work or family needs permitted. She divided them into groups as best she could, moving from arithmetic lessons with the older children to reading primers with the youngest. By noon, when she dismissed them for lunch, she was exhausted. Most of the children scattered to their homes, but a handful stayed, eating lunches from pails and watching her with continued curiosity. A small girl, perhaps 7, with dark braids and enormous brown eyes, approached shyly. "Miss Harper, I like the geography lesson. I want to see other places someday." Beatrice smiled, feeling her first spark of success. "What's your name?" "Lily Patterson. My pa owns the lumber mill." "Well, Lily Patterson, I'm very glad you enjoyed the lesson. We'll do more geography this week." The afternoon went somewhat more smoothly than the morning, perhaps because both teacher and students were adjusting to each other. By the time Beatrice dismissed class at 3, she felt wrung out like a washcloth but cautiously hopeful. She had survived her first day. She was cleaning the blackboard when she heard a commotion outside, the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. Curious, she went to the window and saw a group of riders coming down the main street. They were clearly cowboys, dusty from the trail, their horses loaded with gear. Leading them was a man who made her breath catch for reasons she couldn't quite name. He sat his horse with easy confidence, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather vest over a blue shirt and a Stetson pulled low against the sun. Even from a distance, she could see the strong lines of his jaw, darkened with several days' stubble, and the way other men seemed to defer to him. The group stopped in front of the saloon and the men dismounted, stretching and laughing, clearly pleased to be back in town. Beatrice told herself firmly that it was none of her business and returned to her work. She had enough to worry about without being distracted by every cowboy who rode through town. But as the week progressed, she found herself thinking about that moment more than she wanted to admit. The first week of school ground forward with painful slowness. Beatrice woke each morning already exhausted, faced classrooms full of children who tested her patience and her knowledge in equal measure, and fell into bed each night too tired even for homesickness. She learned her students' names and their personalities. There was Jacob Thornton, Mrs. Thornton's grandson, a sullen 12-year-old who seemed determined to prove Beatrice inadequate. There was sweet Lily Patterson and her older brother Mark, both hungry for learning. There were the Cassidy twins, impossible to tell apart and experts at causing chaos. There was quiet Maria Gonzalez, whose English was limited but whose mathematics skills surpassed the older children. Beatrice also learned the rhythms of Terlingua. The town woke early and worked hard. Men labored at the mercury mines in the surrounding hills, at the lumber mill, at various ranches that spread across the harsh landscape. Women kept households running against the constant assault of dust and heat. The saloon did steady business every evening. The general store was the hub of news and gossip. Church on Sunday was attended by most of the respectable families, and being seen there was apparently crucial to maintaining one's reputation. She was walking back from the general store on Friday afternoon, carrying supplies for the following week's lessons, when she encountered the cowboy again. She quite literally walked into him as she rounded the corner of the mercantile, so distracted by her thoughts that she didn't see him until she had bounced off his solid chest and dropped her parcels. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into a face that was even more striking up close. He had blue-gray eyes that crinkled at the corners, a straight nose, and a mouth that quirked into a smile as he released her and bent to collect her scattered packages. "Sorry, madam, I wasn't watching where I was going." His voice was deep and warm with the slow drawl of someone who had spent his life in the West. "No, it was my fault entirely. I was distracted." Beatrice felt her cheeks flush as she took her packages back, very aware of his height and the way he seemed to fill the space around him. "Thank you. You're the new school teacher." It wasn't a question. "Miss Harper, right? I'm Hudson Porter. I run cattle on the Double P Ranch about 10 miles north of town." "Mr. Porter." She adjusted her spectacles, that nervous habit again. "It's nice to meet you." His smile widened, and she noticed that it was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. "How are you settling in? Town treating you well?" It was such a simple question, asked with such apparent sincerity, that Beatrice felt her careful composure crack. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Some days I think I might manage, and other days I'm certain everyone wishes I'd leave on the next stagecoach." Hudson's expression grew serious. That bad, huh? Let me guess, Sarah Thornton's been making things difficult, among others. Beatrice immediately felt guilty for speaking so freely to a stranger. But I shouldn't complain. I came here knowing it would be challenging. There's challenging, and then there's being made to feel unwelcome. Those are different things. He shifted his weight, his hand resting casually on his belt. For what it's worth, my ranch hands who have kids in your school say you're doing a fine job. Mark Patterson says you're the best teacher they've ever had, and that kid doesn't praise lightly. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. That's very kind of you to say. Just passing along what I've heard. He tipped his hat. I should let you get on with your day, but Miss Harper, don't let the hard-hearted folks get you down. Terlingua needs someone like you, whether they're smart enough to realize it yet or not. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing there with her arms full of packages and her thoughts in complete disarray. Hudson Porter. She repeated the name to herself as she walked back to the schoolhouse, telling herself firmly that there was no reason for her pulse to be racing, or for her to be replaying every moment of that brief encounter. Over the following weeks, autumn deepened even in this desert landscape. The brutal heat eased slightly, though it remained far warmer than Boston autumns. Beatrice fell into a rhythm with her teaching, learning how to manage the chaotic energy of 32 children with different needs and abilities. She started a lending library with her own books and a few donations from townsfolk. She organized a spelling bee that generated surprising enthusiasm. Slowly, incrementally, she began to feel less like an intruder and more like a teacher, but acceptance came slowly and unevenly. Some families embraced her efforts. Mr. Patterson visited to thank her for inspiring Lily's love of learning. Several mothers brought her small gifts, garden vegetables or fresh bread, shy offerings of appreciation. But others remained cold. Mrs. Thornton continued to watch her with critical eyes, and her grandson Jacob seemed determined to prove Beatrice couldn't handle frontier children. The boy was clever and used his intelligence to disrupt lessons, to challenge her authority in ways that weren't quite overt enough to justify serious discipline. It came to a head on a Wednesday in late October. Beatrice was teaching a history lesson about the American Revolution when Jacob interrupted for the 5th time, this time with a question about whether educated women were really women at all or just poor imitations of men. The classroom went silent. Several children looked shocked, while others waited to see how she would respond. Beatrice set down her book very carefully, her hands shaking with anger she refused to show. Jacob Thornton, that comment was disrespectful and inappropriate. You will apologize, and then you will go stand in the corner until I dismiss class. Why should I apologize for speaking the truth? Jacob's face was flushed, his eyes defiant. My grandmother says women like you are unnatural. She says you came out here because no decent man would marry you back east, and you're trying to fill children's heads with ideas above their station. The words struck like physical blows. Beatrice felt every eye in the classroom on her, felt the weight of this moment. If she mishandled it, she would lose whatever authority she had built. But more than that, she felt the old shame rising, the sense that perhaps Jacob was simply saying out loud what everyone thought privately. Before she could respond, the classroom door opened. Hudson Porter stood there, hat in hand, filling the doorway with his presence. Pardon the interruption, Miss Harper. I came to speak with you about tutoring lessons for my nephew, but I couldn't help overhearing. He stepped fully into the room, his gaze finding Jacob. Young man, I've known your grandmother since before you were born, and I can tell you with certainty that she did not raise you to be cruel. What you just said to Miss Harper was cruel and cowardly. Jacob's defiance wavered under Hudson's steady regard. But she said, "I don't care what she said. You're old enough to think for yourself." Hudson's voice remained calm but carried absolute authority. "Miss Harper has done nothing but try to give you and these other children the best education possible. She works harder than most adults I know, and she does it for very little pay and even less gratitude. Now, you're going to apologize sincerely, and then you're going to think hard about the kind of man you want to become. One who tears down people trying to help, or one who has the courage to stand up for what's right." The silence in the classroom was absolute. Jacob's face went through several shades of red before he finally looked at Beatrice. "I'm sorry, Miss Harper. I shouldn't have said those things." They were wrong. Beatrice's throat was tight, but she managed to speak clearly. "Thank you, Jacob. Apology accepted. Please take your seat and pay attention for the remainder of the lesson." Hudson caught her eye, gave her a slight nod that somehow conveyed both support and understanding, and slipped back out of the classroom. The rest of the lesson passed in unusual quiet, the students subdued and thoughtful. When she dismissed class that afternoon, Beatrice found Hudson waiting outside, leaning against the schoolhouse wall with his arms crossed. He straightened when he saw her. "I hope I didn't overstep coming in like that, but I couldn't stand by and let that boy talk to you that way." "You didn't overstep. You saved me from a situation I'm not sure I could have handled alone." She clasped her hands together to keep them from trembling. "Though I'm mortified you heard those things. The only person who should be mortified is Jacob Thornton, and I suspect he is." Hudson's expression was serious. "Miss Harper, can I speak plainly, please? This town has a way of being hard on anyone different, always has. I've seen it happen to others, good people who came here with the best intentions and got ground down by the small-mindedness and suspicion." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I've also seen people push back against that hardness and make a real place for themselves. It takes stubbornness and courage, but it can be done." "I'm not sure I have enough of either," Beatrice admitted quietly. "I think you have more than you know." His smile returned, gentle and encouraging. "You came all the way from Boston to teach children in a town where you knew no one. You've lasted longer than the last teacher and done a better job. You stood up to Jacob today even before I interfered. That takes courage." Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of doubt she had carried since arriving in Terlingua. "Did you really come to ask about tutoring, or was that just an excuse?" Hudson had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Half and half. I do have a nephew, my sister's boy, who could use extra help with reading. But I also heard talk around town about the Thorntons giving you trouble, and I wanted to check on you. I don't like seeing people ganged up on." "That's very kind. Tell me about your nephew." They talked for nearly an hour, standing in the shade of the schoolhouse while the afternoon sun painted the mountains gold and purple. Hudson's nephew was 8, lived on a neighboring ranch, and struggled with letters, though he was bright in other ways. But their conversation wandered far beyond tutoring arrangements. Hudson told her about his ranch, about running cattle in this harsh country, about the challenges of finding enough water and grass. Beatrice found herself talking about Boston, about her family, about her love of teaching and books. It was the easiest conversation she had had since arriving in Texas, perhaps the easiest conversation she had ever had with a man. Hudson listened with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and laughed at her descriptions of her students' antics. When he finally took his leave, promising to bring his nephew by on Saturday for an assessment, Beatrice realized she was smiling for the first time in weeks. That evening, Mrs. Thornton appeared at the schoolhouse door. Beatrice opened it with trepidation, expecting confrontation. Instead, she found the older woman looking older and more tired than usual. "Miss Harper, may I come in?" Surprised, Beatrice stepped aside. "Of course." Mrs. Thornton entered but remained standing, her hands twisting together in an uncharacteristic display of nervousness. "I came to apologize for my grandson and for myself. What Jacob said today, those sentiments came from my mouth, from my bitterness, and that was wrong." She took a breath. "I've been unfair to you from the moment you arrived. I let my own pain and disappointment color my judgment." "Mrs. Thornton, I appreciate you saying that." Beatrice hardly knew how to respond to this unexpected turn. "Let me finish, please." The older woman's voice was firm. "When my son died, something broke in me. He was supposed to inherit the store, carry on the family name. I poured all my hopes into him, and then fever took him in 3 days. After that, I think I decided it was safer not to hope for anything, not to expect anything good. And when you arrived, educated and refined and full of ideas, I saw everything my son might have become, everything this town might be if we weren't all so worn down by just surviving. It was easier to push you away than to hope you might succeed where others failed." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so sorry about your son. I can't imagine that pain. It's no excuse for cruelty." Mrs. Thornton met her gaze directly. "You're a good teacher, Miss Harper, better than we deserve. I hope you'll stay, though I wouldn't blame you if you left. And I'll speak to Jacob. He's a good boy underneath the anger. He just needs guidance, same as all these children need what you're trying to give them." After Mrs. Thornton left, Beatrice sat in the gathering darkness, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The apology had been unexpected and deeply moving. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a place here after all. Saturday arrived bright and clear, one of those perfect autumn days when even the desert seemed to soften. Hudson appeared mid-morning with his nephew, a shy boy named Daniel who hid behind his uncle's considerable frame. Beatrice coaxed him into the classroom, gave him some simple reading tests, and quickly identified his difficulties. They worked together for an hour, and by the end, Daniel was smiling and engaged. "He did wonderfully," Beatrice told Hudson afterward. "With regular practice, he'll be reading at grade level within a few months." "You have a gift for this," Hudson observed. "The way you encouraged him, never made him feel stupid for struggling. That's rare. Every child learns differently. The trick is finding what works for each one." She walked with him to the door. "Will Thursday afternoons work for regular lessons?" "Perfect." Hudson settled his hat on his head, then paused. "Miss Harper, I wonder if I might impose on you for something else." "Of course. What is it?" He looked uncharacteristically uncertain. "There's a dance next Saturday night at the community hall. It's a monthly gathering. Most of the town comes. I wondered if you might allow me to escort you. It would give you a chance to meet people in a less formal setting, and frankly, it might help with acceptance if folks see that you're willing to participate in community events." Beatrice's heart leaped even as her practical mind noted that his reasoning was sound and not particularly romantic. "I would like that, thank you." His smile returned, warm and genuine. "Good. I'll collect you at 7. The week that followed was both easier and more difficult. Easier because Mrs. Thornton's change of heart seemed to have rippled through town, subtly shifting attitudes. Several people who had been cool to Beatrice made friendly overtures. Jacob Thornton became, if not her biggest supporter, at least no longer her active opponent. The children sensed the change and relaxed, making teaching more pleasant. Difficult because Beatrice could not stop thinking about Hudson Porter and the upcoming dance. She told herself repeatedly that it was merely a kind gesture, a practical solution to her isolation problem. He was just being neighborly, but her heart refused to listen to these reasonable arguments. She found herself watching for him in town, replaying their conversations, daydreaming during lessons in a way that would have mortified her if her students had noticed. She had nothing appropriate to wear to a dance. Her Boston dresses were too formal and too heavy. On Thursday afternoon, driven by desperation, she visited the general store and was surprised when Mrs. Thornton produced a bolt of lovely blue fabric. This came in on Tuesday's shipment. "I thought of you immediately. The color would suit you." The older woman's voice was gruff but not unkind. "And before you protest about money, consider it an apology gift. I have a dress pattern that would work beautifully and be appropriate for a Western dance. If you'd like, my daughter-in-law is an excellent seamstress. She could have something ready by Saturday for a reasonable price." Beatrice accepted, touched by the gesture. The dress arrived Saturday afternoon, simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that moved gracefully. The blue did indeed suit her, bringing out the gold in her hair and making her eyes appear more green than hazel. She dressed carefully that evening, spent far too long on her hair, and was a nervous wreck by the time Hudson knocked on her door precisely at 7. He had cleaned up considerably, dressed in black trousers, a white shirt, and a string tie, his dark hair still damp from washing. When she opened the door and saw his expression, the way his eyes widened and his breath seemed to catch, all her nervousness transformed into a different kind of flutter. "Miss Harper, you look beautiful." "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The words came out more breathless than she intended. The community hall was already crowded when they arrived. Lamps hung from rafters casting warm light over the assembled townspeople. A small group of musicians occupied one corner, tuning fiddles and a guitar. Tables along one wall held food contributions, and the smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air. Conversation buzzed, but Beatrice noticed it dim slightly when she entered on Hudson's arm. She fought the urge to turn and flee. But Hudson seemed to sense her tension because he placed his hand over hers where it rested on his arm and gave her a reassuring squeeze. "Just smile and be yourself. These are just people, same as anywhere." Reverend Michaels and his wife approached immediately, greeting Beatrice warmly and pulling her into conversation with several other families. Hudson stayed close but not possessively so, allowing her to navigate the social waters while remaining a steady presence. Gradually, Beatrice relaxed. These were just people, as Hudson had said. Many of them were parents of her students, and once she started talking about their children's progress, the conversation flowed naturally. When the music started, Hudson claimed the first dance. Beatrice hadn't danced in years and said as much, but he simply smiled and led her onto the floor. "Neither have I. We'll figure it out together." It was a simple waltz, and after a few awkward steps they found their rhythm. Hudson was a competent dancer despite his claims otherwise, leading her confidently through the turns. Being held by him, even in the proper dance position, made Beatrice's heart race. She was intensely aware of his hand at her waist, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he smelled of soap and leather and something uniquely him. "Thank you for this," she said quietly as they danced, "for giving me a chance to be part of the community." "I didn't do it just for that reason," Hudson replied, his voice equally quiet. "I wanted an excuse to spend time with you. I've been looking for one since the day you walked into me outside the general store." She looked up at him, startled, and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Hudson, I know it's probably too soon to say such things. You barely know me, but I believe in honesty, and the honest truth is that you've been on my mind constantly since we met. You're intelligent and brave and kind, and you see possibilities in this rough town that most people don't. I admire that. I admire you." Beatrice's voice shook slightly. I think about you too, more than I should. But Hudson, I'm still trying to find my place here. I'm still the outsider, still fighting to be accepted. You fit perfectly right here with me, he said simply. I know everyone's told you that you don't belong, that you're too different, too educated, too refined for this place. But they're wrong. The problem isn't you, it's their limited vision of what Terlingua could be. You fit, Beatrice. You just needed to find the right people to see it. The words hit her with the force of truth. All her life, she had felt too much of something or not enough of something else. Too smart for conventional femininity. Too feminine for academic circles. Too outspoken for proper society. Too proper for unconventional paths. Her aunt's parting words had simply been the latest in a lifetime of messages that she needed to change, to diminish herself, to fit into spaces not designed for her. But Hudson was offering something different, not asking her to change, but insisting she already fit exactly as she was. You barely know me, she whispered, though her heart was singing. Then let me know you better. Let me court you properly if you're willing. We'll take all the time you need. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. But I wanted you to know that you have an ally here, someone who sees your worth and wants to be part of your life, if you'll have me. The music ended, and they were forced to separate as another gentleman claimed Beatrice for the next dance. She moved through the rest of the evening in a daze, dancing with various partners, conversing with townspeople, slowly realizing that the atmosphere toward her had indeed shifted. People were friendlier, more welcoming, and while Hudson's obvious regard for her probably helped, she also sensed that she had earned some of this acceptance through her own efforts. When Hudson escorted her home at the end of the evening, they walked slowly despite the November chill that had crept into the night air. The sky was spectacular, stars scattered across the darkness in profusion impossible in a city. In Boston, you can barely see the stars, Beatrice observed. Too many buildings, too much smoke. This sky is extraordinary. It's one of the things I love about this land. For all its harshness, it has moments of incredible beauty. Hudson paused at her door. Did you mean what you said earlier about thinking about me? Yes. There seemed no point in pretending otherwise. You've been uncommonly kind to me, Hudson. More than that, you've made me feel valued in a way I've rarely experienced. It would be impossible not to think about you. Then, may I officially request permission to court you, Miss Harper? His formality was undercut by the warmth in his eyes. You may, Mr. Porter. I would like that very much. He lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture that should have seemed old-fashioned but instead felt perfectly natural. Sleep well, Beatrice. I'll see you on Thursday when I bring Daniel for his lesson. After he left, Beatrice prepared for bed with her thoughts whirling. Everything had changed so quickly. A month ago, she had been a lonely outsider, certain she had made a terrible mistake. Now she had friends, acceptance, and the attention of a man who made her heart race and her thoughts scatter. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. The courtship that followed was conducted with proper restraint, but underlying intensity. Hudson came to town more frequently than his ranch business strictly required. He brought Daniel for tutoring every Thursday and always stayed to talk with Beatrice afterward. He escorted her to church on Sundays and to the community suppers held every other week. They took walks in the cool evenings, always properly within sight of others, but their conversations grew increasingly personal and intimate. Beatrice learned about Hudson's life. He was 27, had inherited the double P from his father 3 years earlier, when illness had claimed both parents within months of each other. He had a younger sister married to a neighboring rancher, hence his nephew Daniel. He loved the land fiercely despite its challenges, dreamed of building the ranch into something prosperous and lasting. He was respected by other ranchers and well-liked in town, though he kept somewhat apart from the rougher elements that frequented the saloon. Hudson learned about Beatrice in turn. Her family in Boston, comfortable but not wealthy. Her father had been a schoolteacher, instilling his love of learning in all his children. Her mother had died when Beatrice was 15, leaving her to help raise her younger siblings. Her sister had married well, but Beatrice had refused several offers of marriage from men who wanted decorative wives, not thinking partners. She had come to Texas as a last resort after a disagreement with her brother-in-law about her continued presence in his household. "He said I was a bad influence on his daughters," she told Hudson one evening in late November as they walked, "teaching them to value education over marriage prospects. He gave my sister an ultimatum, and I chose to leave rather than cause more problems." "His loss is Terlingua's gain," Hudson said firmly, "and mine, though I'm sorry you were treated that way by family." As November turned to December, the relationship deepened. They still maintained propriety, always conscious of watchful eyes and the need to protect Beatrice's reputation. But the connection between them grew undeniable. Beatrice found herself falling in love with Hudson's steady strength, his kindness, his dry sense of humor. He made her laugh, challenged her thinking, and listened to her opinions with genuine interest. He never made her feel that her intelligence or education was threatening or unwomanly. Hudson, for his part, seemed equally captivated. He looked at Beatrice with such warmth that she sometimes felt breathless. He brought her small gifts, a book from a traveling salesman, wildflowers that somehow bloomed in the desert winter, a shawl he had commissioned from a local weaver. He made it clear to everyone in town that Beatrice Harper was under his protection and had his regard. The shift in town attitudes became more pronounced. Mrs. Thornton now greeted Beatrice warmly and often invited her to tea. Other women began including her in their social circles. Men tipped their hats respectfully. The children in her classroom thrived, and parents expressed regular appreciation for her work. Beatrice began to feel, for the first time in her life, that she had found a place where she truly belonged. But it wasn't just Hudson's regard that had changed things, though that certainly helped. Beatrice had proven herself through consistent dedication and competence. She had faced down challenges without running away. She had adapted to the harsh Texas climate and frontier ways without losing her essential self. The town had tested her and found her worthy. In mid-December, Hudson asked if he could take her to see his ranch. "I want you to see where I live, what my life is like beyond town, and I promise to have you back before dark to preserve propriety." They rode out on a clear Saturday morning, Beatrice on a gentle mare Hudson had borrowed from a friend. The 10 miles passed through harsh but beautiful country, all red rock and scrub brush with the mountains as a dramatic backdrop. The Double P itself surprised her. She had expected something rough and primitive, but while the ranch house was simple, it was well built and maintained, with a wide porch and windows that caught the morning light. Hudson showed her around with obvious pride. The house interior was sparse but comfortable, with furniture he had built himself and a few treasured items from his parents. The barn and outbuildings were sturdy and organized. The cattle grazed in the distance, moving slowly across the winter-brown grass. "It's not fancy," Hudson said as they stood on the porch looking out at his land, "but it's mine, built with my own hands and sweat. There's room to grow to build something lasting." He paused, then turned to face her. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I'm in love with you. I have been for weeks, maybe from that first moment you crashed into me outside the mercantile." His voice was steady but intense. "I know it's only been a few months. I know you might need more time, but I wanted you to know where I stand. I love you and I want to build a life with you here, on this ranch in this town. I want to marry you, Beatrice, if you'll have me." Beatrice felt tears gather in her eyes. "Hudson, I love you too. I never expected to find this, to feel this way. You've given me so much more than acceptance or a place in the community. You've given me yourself, honestly and completely. How could I not love you? Is that a yes?" His voice held cautious hope. "It's a yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to build a life here with you." She laughed through her tears. "My aunt told me I'd never fit in out here. She said I was too different, too wrong for frontier life. But you were right. I fit perfectly right here with you." Hudson pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and for a long moment they simply stood together, wrapped in each other in the vast silence of the Texas landscape. When he finally kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise and a beginning. They married in January of 1884, in the small church in Terlingua, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Beatrice wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Thornton had helped her make, and Hudson wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony, speaking about love and partnership and the building of new lives in hard places. Afterward, there was a reception in the community hall with food and music and dancing that lasted late into the evening. Beatrice danced with her new husband, with her students' fathers, with Reverend Michaels and old Mr. Patterson, and even Jacob Thornton, who had become one of her most improved students. She accepted congratulations and well wishes from people who, just months ago, had viewed her with suspicion and hostility. "Happy," Hudson murmured as they danced together late in the evening. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Beatrice replied honestly. "I came here thinking I was running away from failure, but I was really running toward this, toward you, toward home." They moved into the ranch house at the Double P, and Beatrice continued teaching, making the daily ride into town with Hudson or by herself when his work kept him at the ranch. It was a hard life in many ways. The work was endless, the climate unforgiving, the isolation sometimes oppressive. But it was also filled with profound satisfaction and joy. Beatrice discovered she loved ranch life more than she had expected. She learned to garden in the difficult soil, to preserve food for winter, to mend and make do. She learned about cattle and horses, about weather patterns and water sources. Hudson taught her to ride better, to shoot, to read the signs of the desert. She taught him about literature and history, read to him in the evenings, shared her passion for learning. Their first year of marriage was a time of adjustment and discovery. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, negotiated the daily compromises of shared life. They had disagreements, of course, usually about small things made larger by exhaustion or stress. But they also had moments of profound connection, lying together under the vast Texas sky, talking until dawn, finding in each other a partnership that went beyond romance into genuine friendship. In the spring, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She continued teaching through the summer, finally stopping in August when the heat and her expanding body made the daily ride too difficult. Hudson hired a temporary teacher, a young man from El Paso, to finish out the term until they could find a permanent replacement. Their son was born on a cool October morning in 1884, delivered by a midwife with Hudson pacing anxiously outside. They named him Henry James Porter, and he was perfect and terrifying, a tiny human entirely dependent on them. Beatrice, who had taught hundreds of children, found motherhood both harder and more rewarding than she had imagined. "He has your eyes," Hudson said softly, holding his son with a mixture of awe and fear. And your stubborn chin, Beatrice replied, watching them together and feeling her heart might burst from fullness. She returned to teaching part-time when Henry was 6 months old, taking him with her to the schoolhouse where he napped in a cradle while she taught. The children were delighted to have a baby in the classroom, and he became something of a mascot. When he grew too active for that arrangement, Mrs. Thornton offered to watch him during school hours, a gesture of friendship that moved Beatrice deeply. Time passed with the particular quality it has when life is full and demanding. Henry grew into a bright, curious toddler, and then a rambunctious boy. The ranch prospered as Hudson's hard work and smart management paid off. They added cattle, improved the house, built better outbuildings. Beatrice became a fixture in Terlingua, respected not just as a teacher but as a community member, someone people turned to for advice or help. In 1887, their daughter was born, a tiny girl they named Grace Elizabeth Porter. She was quieter than her brother had been, more contemplative, with Hudson's dark hair and a serious expression that made visitors laugh. Henry was fascinated by his new sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. The years that followed were full in the best possible way. Full of work and worry, yes, but also full of love and laughter and the particular satisfaction that comes from building something lasting. Beatrice never returned to teaching full-time after Grace was born, but she tutored students privately and served on the school board, ensuring that education remained a priority in Terlingua. Hudson expanded the ranch, buying adjoining land as it became available, building the Double P into one of the most successful operations in the region. He was a fair employer, a respected neighbor, and a devoted husband and father. He made time for his family despite the demands of ranch life, teaching his children to ride and rope, reading them stories Beatrice chose, instilling in them both toughness and tenderness. In 1890, twin boys arrived unexpectedly, turning the household into cheerful chaos. Matthew and Thomas Porter were identical and energetic, keeping everyone on their toes. Beatrice, now 30, felt she had her hands full in the best possible way. The house that had seemed so sparse when she first saw it was now bursting with life and noise and love. The children grew, each developing distinct personalities. Henry was the responsible oldest, already showing his father's aptitude for ranching. Grace was the dreamer, always with her nose in a book, reminding Hudson of Beatrice when they first met. Matthew and Thomas were inseparable mischief makers, balancing each other perfectly. In 1895, when Beatrice was 35 and beginning to think their family was complete, she discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and both she and Hudson worried. But in February of 1896, their youngest son was born healthy and strong. They named him Samuel, and he became the baby of the family, doted on by his older siblings and parents alike. By the turn of the century, the Porters were one of the most established families in Terlingua. The town itself had grown and changed, becoming more settled and prosperous. The wild days of the frontier were fading into memory, replaced by schools and churches and organized civic life that Beatrice and others like her had worked to build. Hudson, now in his early 40s, had silver threading through his dark hair, but remained as strong and vital as ever. He looked at Beatrice across the dinner table, crowded with their children, and felt the same leap of his heart he had felt that day outside the general store nearly 17 years ago. Beatrice, graying herself and wearing spectacles that were more necessity than nervous habit now, looked back and smiled the smile that was reserved only for him. She thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stage coach so long ago, certain she would never belong, certain she had made a terrible mistake. That woman had been so wrong about so many things. She had fit in, not by changing herself, but by finding the people and place that had space for exactly who she was. She had built a life richer and fuller than any she had imagined in Boston. She had found love with a man who saw her truly and cherished what he saw. She had raised children and taught hundreds of students and helped build a community. On a cool evening in the spring of 1900, Hudson and Beatrice sat on their porch after the children had been put to bed. The youngest three were asleep in the house behind them, while Henry was out checking cattle with the ranch hands and Grace was reading in her room. The desert stretched before them, painted in the purples and golds of sunset. "You ever regret it?" Hudson asked quietly. "Giving up the life you could have had back east, the culture and sophistication." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her. "Never, not once. This is where I belong, Hudson, with you, with our children on this land. My aunt told me I'd never fit in, but she was wrong. I fit perfectly right here with you. I always have. You've made me the happiest man alive," Hudson said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You and the children, this life we've built together, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had amazed Beatrice that first night Hudson walked her home from the dance. The land around them was still harsh, still demanding, but it was home in a way nowhere else had ever been. Inside the house, they could hear the children starting to stir, someone calling for water, the inevitable bedtime negotiations beginning. Hudson sighed good-naturedly and stood, offering Beatrice his hand to help her up. "Duty calls." "It does indeed." She took his hand, standing, and they walked back into the warm light of the house together, partners in all things. The years continued to roll forward with their particular mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. In 1903, Henry married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a practical young woman named Sarah who reminded Hudson of Beatrice in her competence and quiet strength. They built a house on the northern section of the Double P land that Hudson deeded to his son, starting their own family while remaining part of the larger ranch operation. Grace, true to her bookish nature, won a scholarship to a women's college in Austin. It was Beatrice who encouraged her to go despite Hudson's initial reluctance to have his daughter so far away. "She has to follow her own path," Beatrice told her husband gently. "The same way I had to follow mine. You can't protect her from life by keeping her close." The twins, Matthew and Thomas, showed no interest in ranching. Instead, they apprenticed with a surveyor who passed through Terlingua, discovering a shared fascination with map-making and land measurement. By 1905, they had established their own surveying business, traveling throughout West Texas and sending letters home full of adventures and discoveries. Samuel, the youngest, remained at home, helping his father run the ranch and showing the same deep connection to the land that Hudson possessed. He was quieter than his siblings, more contemplative, but with a wry sense of humor that could surprise people. In 1907, Beatrice's sister wrote from Boston. Their brother-in-law had passed away, and her sister was struggling financially. Without hesitation, Beatrice invited her to Terlingua. The sister who arrived was older and worn, with 2 grown daughters and a humility that had been absent in their youth. "I judged you harshly," her sister admitted one evening, sitting on the porch where Beatrice had spent so many peaceful hours. "I thought you were running away to nothing. But you were running toward everything. You built a real life, Beatrice, more real than anything I had in Boston with all our pretensions to sophistication. You're welcome to stay here as long as you like," Beatrice told her, There's always room for family. Her sister did stay, eventually marrying a widowed rancher and settling permanently in Texas. Her daughters became part of Terlingua's younger generation, finding their own paths in this land that had once seemed so foreign and forbidding. The Double P continued to prosper. By 1910, it was one of the largest and most successful ranches in the region, employing dozens of hands and running thousands of head of cattle. Hudson, now in his 50s, began gradually turning more responsibility over to Henry and Samuel, though he remained active in the ranch operations. His hair was fully silver now, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes still held the warmth and intelligence that had first drawn Beatrice to him. Beatrice, approaching 50, had retired from formal teaching but remained deeply involved in education. She served as head of the school board, mentored new teachers, and maintained a private tutoring practice for students who needed extra help. She had also become something of a community matriarch, someone people turned to for advice on everything from child rearing to garden planning to resolving disputes. Their grandchildren began arriving. Henry and Sarah had 4 children in quick succession, rowdy grandkids who filled the ranch house with noise and energy during their frequent visits. Grace, who had become a teacher herself in Austin, married a professor and had 2 daughters who were as bookish as their mother. Even the twins, settled now in El Paso with their surveying business, married and started families. In the summer of 1912, the entire Porter clan gathered at the ranch for a reunion. Children and grandchildren, Beatrice's sister and her family, old friends from town, all crowded onto the property for a weekend of celebration. Hudson, watching the chaos of his large, loud, loving family, felt a profound sense of accomplishment and gratitude. That evening, after most of the guests had departed or gone to bed, Hudson and Beatrice walked out to a spot on their land they had always loved, a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings and provided a view of the mountains beyond. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. 28 years, Hudson said, taking Beatrice's hand. 28 years since I first saw you step off that stagecoach, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. 28 years since you told me I fit perfectly right here with you, Beatrice replied. Best 28 years of my life, Hudson Porter. Mine too, Beatrice Porter. He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the sun sink toward the horizon, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something remarkable from love and stubbornness and faith. You remember that first day? Beatrice asked softly. How hostile everyone was. How certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. Still think that, in fact. Hudson's arm tightened around her. You came to a place that didn't want you and made them want you. You took a rough frontier town and helped civilize it without losing its essential character. You raised 5 remarkable children and helped raise dozens more through your teaching. You built a home and a family and a legacy. If that's not brave, I don't know what is. I had help, Beatrice pointed out. I had you. From almost the beginning, I had you believing in me, supporting me, loving me. That made all the difference, Hudson. You made all the difference. They stood in silence as the last light faded and stars began to emerge. The same stars that had witnessed their courtship and marriage, that had looked down on this land long before either of them was born and would continue long after they were gone. But for this moment, for this precious span of years, they had been here together, and they had mattered. The years that followed were gentler. Hudson and Beatrice moved into what they thought of as their sunset years with grace and continued purpose. The ranch operations were firmly in the capable hands of Henry and Samuel, allowing Hudson to take a less active role. He still rode out most days, still couldn't quite let go of the land he had worked all his life, but he also had time now for leisure he had never permitted himself before. Beatrice remained active in community affairs well into her 60s. She watched with satisfaction as Terlingua continued to grow and develop. The rough mining town of her arrival transformed into a proper community with schools and churches and civic organizations. She had played no small part in that transformation, and the town recognized it. When a new school building was constructed in 1918, they named it Harper Hall in her honor, a gesture that moved her to tears. The Great War touched even Terlingua. Matthew's oldest son enlisted and served in France, returning in 1919 changed but whole. The entire family had held their breath through those months, praying for his safe return. The experience brought home to Beatrice how much the world had changed since her youth, how even this remote corner of Texas was now connected to global events in ways that would have been unimaginable in 1883. In 1920, women gained the right to vote. Beatrice, now 60 years old, cast her first ballot with a sense of triumph and vindication. She thought about her younger self, fighting to be taken seriously as an educated woman, working to prove she had value beyond conventional feminine roles. Progress had been slow, painfully slow, but it had come. Hudson's health began to decline in his late 60s. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down of a body that had worked hard for decades in a harsh climate. He developed a persistent cough, his joints ached, moving became more difficult. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Beatrice never wavered. They spent more and more time on their porch, watching the land they loved, talking about their life together, their children and grandchildren, the memories they had accumulated. Hudson would take Beatrice's hand, the same way he had that first night walking her home from the dance, and she would lean against his shoulder, and no words were necessary. They had said everything that needed saying through years of partnership and devotion. In the spring of 1925, Hudson caught pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts and Beatrice's devoted nursing, he declined rapidly. On a warm April evening, surrounded by his family, Hudson Porter passed away at the age of 67. His last words, whispered to Beatrice as she held his hand, were, "You fit perfectly right here with me. Always did. Always will." Beatrice's grief was profound but not debilitating. She had known this day would come eventually, had prepared herself as much as anyone can prepare for the loss of their life's partner. She mourned deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together, in the community where they had made their mark. She remained at the Double P, living in the house she and Hudson had shared for over 40 years. Henry and Sarah lived nearby and checked on her daily, but Beatrice maintained her independence. She still tutored occasionally, still served on the school board, still participated in church and community events. She was a living link to Terlingua's early days, a repository of history and wisdom that people sought out. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren would gather around her on the porch, the same porch where she and Hudson had spent so many evenings, and beg for stories. She told them about arriving in Terlingua as a frightened young woman from Boston, about the suspicion and hostility she had faced, about the cowboy who had defended her and courted her and loved her. "Your grandfather used to say I fit perfectly right here with him," she would tell them, her eyes distant with memory. "I was told I'd never fit in, that I was too different, too educated, too outspoken for this place. But he saw past all that. He saw me, truly saw me, and loved what he saw. That kind of love, that kind of acceptance, it changes everything. It changed me. It gave me the courage to become who I was always meant to be. Grace, who had retired from teaching and moved back to Terlingua after her husband's death, often sat with her mother during those storytelling sessions. "You changed the town too, Mama," she would add. "You made it better, more cultured, more educated. You proved that frontier life didn't have to mean giving up learning or refinement." Beatrice lived to see many changes. She saw automobiles replace horses on Terlingua's streets, saw electricity come to town, saw her great-grandchildren attend high school, an opportunity that hadn't existed when she first arrived. She saw women take on roles and responsibilities that would have been unthinkable in 1883. She saw the Wild West become civilized, for better and worse. On a warm evening in September of 1930, at the age of 70, Beatrice Harper Porter sat on her porch watching the sunset. Grace was inside preparing supper, and several grandchildren were playing in the yard. The mountains in the distance were painted purple and gold, exactly as they had been 47 years ago when she first arrived. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fears and hopes, the struggles and triumphs. She thought about Hudson, gone now for 5 years but still so present in her heart and in everything around her. She thought about their children, all grown and successful in their own ways, living proof that love and stubbornness could build something lasting. She thought about that terrified young woman stepping off the stagecoach, certain she would never belong. If she could speak to that younger self now, what would she say? That the journey would be hard but worth it. That love would find her in the most unexpected way. That she would build a life beyond her wildest imaginings. Perhaps simply this: trust yourself. You are stronger than you know. And when the right person comes along, when someone tells you that you fit perfectly right here with them, believe them. They might just be right. As the sun sank lower and the first stars appeared, Beatrice felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had lived a full life, a meaningful life, a life rich in love and purpose. She had found her place in the world, not by changing herself but by having the courage to be herself fully and trusting that the right people would recognize her worth. The screen door creaked and Grace emerged with a shawl. "Getting cool, Mama. You should come inside." "In a moment, dear." Beatrice pulled the shawl around her shoulders but didn't move. "I'm just remembering." Grace settled into the chair beside her mother, the same chair Hudson used to occupy. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen, 3 generations of Porter women visible through the windows behind them preparing the evening meal. "You miss him?" Grace asked softly, though she knew the answer. "Every day, every single day." Beatrice's voice was steady. "But I also feel him everywhere, in this land we loved, in our children, in the life we built. He told me once that I fit perfectly right here with him, and he was right. I did. I do. Even now that he's gone, I still fit here because he helped make me into the woman who belongs in this place." "You made yourself, Mama. You had the courage to come here, to stay when it was hard, to build a life against all odds." "Maybe," Beatrice conceded, "but I couldn't have done it without him. Love gave me the strength to become who I was meant to be. That's his gift to me, his legacy." That and 5 remarkable children, too many grandchildren to count, and a lifetime of memories that keep me company even when the nights are long. They sat until the stars were fully out, until the grandchildren had been called inside for supper, until the night air grew too cool even for the shawl. Then, with Grace's help, Beatrice stood and walked into the house, into the warmth and light and laughter of family, into the home she and Hudson had built together. Beatrice lived 2 more years, dying peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1932 at the age of 72. The funeral was one of the largest Terlingua had ever seen, testament to the impact she had made on multiple generations. She was buried beside Hudson on a hill overlooking the Double P, her gravestone simple but eloquent. Beatrice Harper Porter, 1860–1932, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher. She found her place. At the reception following the funeral, as the family gathered at the ranch house, Grace stood to speak. My mother came to Terlingua nearly 50 years ago as a stranger in a strange land. She was told she'd never fit in, that she was too different for this hard place. But my father, he saw her truly. He told her she fit perfectly right here with him, and he spent the rest of his life proving it. Together, they built something remarkable, not just this ranch and our family, but a legacy of love and courage and determination. They showed us all that fitting in doesn't mean changing yourself. It means finding the people and places that have room for exactly who you are. The assembled family murmured agreement, and then the stories began, as they always do at such gatherings. Stories about Beatrice and Hudson, about their courtship and marriage, about raising 5 children while building a ranch, about facing down hardship with combined strength. Stories about her teaching, about the countless children whose lives she had touched, about her role in transforming Terlingua from a rough mining camp into a real community. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in familiar golds and purples, the Porter family stood together on the porch where Beatrice and Hudson had spent so many peaceful hours. They looked out at the land that had been won through hard work and maintained through dedication, at the mountains that had witnessed the building of a dynasty, at the sky that held the same stars that had shone on that first dance nearly 50 years ago. Henry, now in his late 40s and the patriarch of the family, raised a glass. To Beatrice and Hudson Porter, they came from different worlds and built a new one together. They loved fiercely, worked tirelessly, and left us all an example of what's possible when 2 people truly fit together. May we honor their memory by living with the same courage and commitment they showed every day of their lives. To Beatrice and Hudson, the family echoed, and the words seemed to hang in the evening air, a benediction and a promise. The Double P continued under Henry's management, and then under his sons, remaining in the Porter family for generations. Harper Hall still stands in Terlingua, educating children just as Beatrice once did in that small, rough schoolhouse so many years ago. The town grew and changed, as all towns do, but it never forgot the young woman from Boston who had helped civilize it, or the cowboy who had seen her worth when others saw only an outsider. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset paints the Texas sky in impossible colors, when the wind carries the scent of sage and dust, locals swear they can see 2 figures on the hill overlooking the Double P. A tall man and a woman with spectacles, standing together looking out at the land they loved, still fitting perfectly right here together, still proving that love can bridge any distance, overcome any obstacle, and build something lasting in the most unlikely places. That's the legend, anyway. But the truth is simpler and more profound. The truth is that Beatrice Harper came to Terlingua in 1883 expecting nothing and found everything. She was told she'd never fit in, but a cowboy named Hudson Porter looked at her and said, "You fit perfectly right here with me." And in believing him, in trusting that love, she found not just a place in a town or on a ranch, but a place in the world. She found herself, whole and accepted and cherished exactly as she was. And that, in the end, is the only story that matters. Not the details of daily life or the specific challenges overcome, but the fundamental truth that somewhere in this vast world, there is a place where each of us fits perfectly. Sometimes we have to travel far to find it. Sometimes we have to be brave enough to stay when others tell us to leave. Sometimes we have to trust in love even when it seems unlikely or improbable. But when we find that place, that person, that moment of perfect recognition, when someone looks at us and sees us truly and says, "You fit perfectly right here with me," everything changes. All the doubt and fear and loneliness falls away, and we understand at last that we were always meant to end up exactly where we are. Beatrice found her place in the unlikely setting of West Texas in the 1880s. Hudson found his partner in an educated woman from Boston. Together, they built a life that proved love and acceptance can flourish even in the harshest environments. Their story became legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that fitting in isn't about conforming to expectations. It's about finding the people who have room in their hearts for exactly who you are, and having the courage to claim your place beside them. The sun sets over Terlingua tonight as it has for centuries, painting the sky in golds and purples, illuminating the mountains and the desert with the same light that witnessed Beatrice's arrival and Hudson's courtship, and their long, full life together. The double P still stands, still thrives, still carries their legacy forward. And somewhere in that vast Texas sky among the countless stars, perhaps two souls still sit together on a porch, holding hands, watching the land they loved, fitting perfectly together for all eternity.